For an entire year, Gabriel Cross walked past the quiet woman who held his empire together and never once truly saw her. Then another man made her laugh, and the most dangerous man in Baltimore discovered that jealousy could expose a weakness even bullets could not. Maybe you know that kind of pain. You show up early, fix what others break, love more deeply than anyone realizes, and still feel invisible. Grace Nolan knew it too. Every morning she sat outside a glass office above the harbor, surrounded by polished stone, cold winter light, and people who only noticed her when something went wrong. But one warm laugh changed the balance of power. Stay with this story, because it is not only about obsession, danger, and forbidden love. It is about what happens when a woman who has spent her life disappearing finally becomes impossible to ignore. Watch until the end, like the video, and comment where you are watching from. But before Gabriel Cross heard Grace Nolan laugh, before jealousy cracked the calm expression that had frightened half of Baltimore, there had been 12 quiet months in which she believed he had never truly looked at her at all. The morning before everything changed began beneath a sky the color of wet concrete. Baltimore stirred slowly along the harbor. Cargo cranes stood above the water like enormous iron birds, their long arms reaching through the fog. Tugboats moved between freighters with low, mournful horns. Delivery trucks rolled through the industrial streets, carrying steel produce machine parts and things that never appeared on any official manifest. Cross Harbor Tower rose above the waterfront, 34 floors of dark glass and pale stone. The company name was mounted over the entrance in brushed silver letters. Respectable, expensive, clean. Nothing about the building suggested blood. Grace Nolan arrived at 7:10 as she did every weekday. She stepped off the city bus with one hand holding her coat closed against the wind. The harbor air found every opening in the fabric and slipped beneath it. Her cheeks were cold by the time she crossed the plaza, but she did not hurry. Grace rarely hurried in public. Moving too fast attracted attention, and attention had never felt safe to her. The security guard at the lobby desk looked up. "Morning, Miss Nolan." "Good morning, Charles." He smiled as she passed. Grace knew his wife had recently started physical therapy after knee surgery. She knew his eldest daughter had applied to nursing school. She knew he preferred tea but drank coffee because the night shift never remembered to refill the tea bags. Grace noticed people. It was one of the reasons she was so good at a job that required everyone else to forget she existed. The elevators opened without a sound. She rode alone to the 32nd floor, listening to the soft mechanical hum as the city dropped away beneath her. When the doors opened, the executive level was dark except for the low lights along the walls. Grace liked the office at that hour. No ringing phones, no hurried footsteps, no men in expensive suits speaking too loudly because they wanted everyone to know they had authority. Just the whisper of ventilation, the faint glow of computer screens waking, and the gray morning pressing against the windows. Her desk stood outside Gabriel Cross's private office. It was not a large space. 2 monitors, 3 phone lines, a brass reading lamp, a stack of legal pads, and a small plant in a chipped white pot. The plant had been a gift from her mother, who had called it impossible to kill. Grace had nearly proved her wrong twice. She set down her bag, removed her coat, and began preparing the day. By 7:20, she had found an error in an acquisition report that would have overstated expected revenue by more than $2 million. By 7:30, she had moved a meeting with the deputy mayor after learning his flight from Atlanta had been delayed. By 7:40, she had stopped the legal department from sending Gabriel a contract missing 2 pages of liability terms. At 7:55, she noticed that someone had placed a lunch meeting on his calendar during the anniversary of his mother's death. Grace removed it without explanation and rescheduled the meeting for Friday. No one had told her to protect that date. She had simply noticed that Gabriel never scheduled anything personal on December 9th. He arrived early, remained in his office, and left before sunset. The first year she worked for him, she had seen a black car take him to a cemetery. He never mentioned it. Grace never asked. That was the rhythm of her relationship with Gabriel Cross. She knew the shape of his silences. He knew the sound of her professional voice. Nothing more. At 8:15, the office began to fill. Assistants entered carrying tablets and coffee. Attorneys moved through the corridor with folders held against their chests. Department heads gathered near the conference room, lowering their voices whenever they passed Gabriel's closed office. He was not there yet, but his absence still controlled the floor. A junior analyst named Daniel stopped beside Grace's desk. "Did you see the revised figures from Atlantic Freight? They are in the blue folder." He looked down at the files. "There are 6 blue folders, the one marked Atlantic Freight." Daniel found it and gave her a sheepish smile. "Right. Obviously." Grace smiled back. He walked away without thanking her. She did not resent him for it. People rarely thanked the mechanism inside a clock for keeping time. At 8:38, the private elevator chimed. The entire floor changed. Conversations shortened, shoulders straightened. A man near the windows closed a sports page on his computer. Someone in acquisitions slid a phone into a pocket so quickly it almost fell. 2 security officers stepped out first. Julian Ward followed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and composed in the way of a man who had spent years standing close to danger without allowing it to surprise him. His dark suit fit perfectly, but Grace had seen enough of him to know the jacket concealed a weapon. Julian looked at her. "Morning, Grace." "Good morning, Mr. Ward. I keep telling you to call me Julian. And I keep ignoring you." The corner of his mouth moved. "You are learning from the wrong man." Then Gabriel Cross stepped out of the elevator. He wore a black overcoat over a charcoal suit. No visible tie pin, no unnecessary jewelry. His dark hair was brushed back from his forehead, and the cold had brought a faint color into his otherwise controlled face. He did not have the largest body on the floor. He simply occupied more of the room than anyone else. Gabriel moved with the certainty of a man who had never needed to check whether people would make space for him. They always did. Grace stood. "Good morning, Mr. Cross." His eyes remained on the phone in his hand. He gave a slight nod and walked past her. The scent of cedar and winter air followed him into his office. The door closed. Grace remained standing for 1 second, then she sat down. The disappointment was small, familiar, almost embarrassing. She did not expect warmth from him. She knew who he was, or at least who the world believed him to be. Gabriel Cross was the chief executive officer of Cross Harbor Industries, a company that controlled warehouses, private security contracts, construction projects, and shipping routes across the Mid-Atlantic region. His picture appeared in business magazines beside phrases like disciplined expansion and strategic leadership. Those articles never mentioned the men who waited for him in private rooms above closed restaurants. They did not mention the trucks that passed through the harbor after midnight without inspection. They did not mention his father, Michael Cross, whose name still made older men glance toward the nearest door before speaking. Grace had never seen Gabriel commit a crime. She had seen people obey him too quickly. That was enough. At 9, Gabriel called through the intercom. "Grace." She picked up her notebook and entered his office. The room faced the harbor through a wall of glass. Ships moved across the dark water below. Gabriel stood near his desk, reading the corrected acquisition report. "Page 14, he said. "The revenue calculation was wrong. Whose error accounting copied the quarterly forecast instead of the annual projection?" Gabriel looked at her. It was not a warm look, but it was direct. "You caught it before the board received it." "Yes." "How the numbers were too clean." He glanced down at the report again. "Too clean. Growth rarely forms a perfect curve unless someone is hiding the uneven parts." For a brief moment, something changed in his expression. Interest, perhaps. Then it disappeared. "Have accounting rebuild the model." "I already did." His eyes returned to her. Grace waited. "Anything else?" she asked. "No." She turned toward the door. "Grace." She stopped. "Good work." The words were quiet and almost reluctant. She looked back. "Thank you, Mr. Cross." Outside his office, she closed the door carefully and returned to her desk. Her face felt warmer than it should have. It was ridiculous. 2 words should not have mattered so much. But when a person survives on crumbs, even kindness can feel like a feast. Grace had not always been quiet. As a child, she had talked to anyone who would listen. She had made up stories during dinner sung too loudly in the kitchen, and once performed an entire school play for her mother using wooden spoons as actors. Then her older brother began getting into trouble. Police calls, missed school, fights, money disappearing from drawers. Her mother worked double shifts at a hospital laundry and came home with swollen feet and no patience left for anything that was not urgent. Grace learned to measure the room before speaking. If her mother looked tired, Grace said school had been fine. If the rent was late, Grace claimed she did not need new shoes. If her brother slammed a door, Grace went silent until the walls stopped shaking. By the time she was old enough to understand loneliness, she had already become skilled at hiding it. Her mother called her easy. Grace had once believed it was praise. At noon, she ate half a sandwich at her desk while answering emails. A shadow fell across her keyboard. She looked up. Noah Bennett stood on the other side of the desk wearing the Navy uniform of building security. His sandy hair was slightly disordered, as if he had removed his cap and forgotten to fix it afterward. "You know there is a room downstairs where people sit while they eat. I have heard rumors. It has chairs. So does this floor. It also has windows." Grace looked toward the glass wall behind her. "We have windows." Noah followed her gaze toward the harbor. "Yes, but these windows look expensive enough to judge me." Grace smiled despite herself. Noah noticed. He always noticed. He had started working at Cross Harbor Tower 4 months earlier. At first, he had only greeted her in the lobby. Then he began appearing on the executive floor with reasons that sounded increasingly weak. A camera inspection, a badge update, a report that could easily have been sent by email. Grace understood what he was doing, but his attention did not feel heavy. He did not crowd her or act as if friendliness created a debt. He simply stayed long enough to make her day feel less quiet. Noah leaned against the desk. "You leaving before dark tonight?" "Possibly." What does possibly mean? It means there is a chance. How much of a chance Grace considered? 14%. That is terrible. It is higher than yesterday. He placed a hand over his heart. Progress. She looked down at her sandwich. Noah lowered his voice. "There is a place near the market that makes a good crab cake. This is Baltimore. Every place claims that. This one is telling the truth." "You sound certain. I have done extensive research. Eating lunch is not research. It is when you take notes." Grace looked up at him. "Are you asking me to dinner?" "Yes." The directness surprised her. Noah's expression remained easy, but there was sincerity beneath it. Grace's first instinct was to refuse, not because she disliked him, because saying yes meant entering a room where she might be expected to want something. She had spent years avoiding that kind of exposure. "I don't know," she said. "That is not a no. It is not a yes either. I can work with that." Noah straightened. "Think about it." He walked toward the elevators. Grace watched him go. Across the corridor behind the dark glass of Gabriel's office, a figure stood near the window. Grace looked away before she could decide whether Gabriel had been watching. That afternoon passed beneath the steady pressure of work. At 3, Gabriel dismantled a proposal from the construction division with 6 questions and 1 long silence. At 4, Grace learned that a shipment of steel had been delayed at the southern port. At 5, Julian entered Gabriel's office carrying a black folder and remained inside for 40 minutes. At 6:15, most of the executive floor emptied. Grace stayed. She corrected schedules, returned calls, and prepared folders for the following morning. The sky outside darkened from gray to deep blue. Harbor lights appeared one by one on the water. At 7, Gabriel's office door opened. He stepped into the corridor with Julian beside him. Grace was still typing. Gabriel stopped. "You are here late." She looked up. "So are you." Julian glanced at Gabriel, clearly entertained by the answer. Gabriel's expression did not change. "Do you have transportation?" "The bus. At this hour, it still runs." He looked toward the windows where rain had begun tapping softly against the glass. "Julian." "Yes. Have a car take her home." Grace stood. "That is not necessary." Gabriel's eyes settled on her. "I did not ask whether it was necessary. I take the bus every night. Not tonight." The words carried the finality of a locked door. Grace felt irritation rise beneath her ribs. "I am capable of getting home alone. I am aware." "Then why are we discussing this?" Something unreadable passed through his gaze. "Because it is raining." Grace looked toward the windows. It was not a good explanation. It was barely an explanation at all. Julian cleared his throat. "I will arrange the car." Gabriel walked toward the private elevator without another word. Grace watched him go. Julian remained beside her desk. "He is better at giving orders than reasons. I noticed. He worries badly." Grace looked at him. "About the weather." Julian's expression offered nothing, among other things. Before Grace could ask, he followed Gabriel into the elevator. The doors closed. A black sedan took her home that night. The driver waited until she had entered her apartment building before pulling away. Grace stood inside the lobby watching the red taillights disappear through the rain. She told herself the car meant nothing. Gabriel protected employees because protecting people was efficient. Important staff should arrive safely. A competent assistant was difficult to replace. There were practical explanations for everything if a person wanted them badly enough. Across the city, Gabriel stood in a private office above a closed seafood restaurant near the harbor. The room smelled of cigar smoke, old wood, and coffee left too long in the pot. Julian placed photographs on the table. Men linked to Victor Rourke had been seen near Cross Harbor properties. One had followed a company vehicle. Another had photographed the private garage entrance. Gabriel studied the images. "Rourke is looking for pressure points," Julian said. "He will not find one. Everyone has one." Gabriel's gaze hardened. Julian continued. "We should increase security around senior personnel." "Do it." And Grace. The room became still. Gabriel looked toward the rain moving down the window. No visible detail. Julian folded his arms. "You want her unprotected? I want her unnoticed. She works outside your office. She is an assistant. People see assistants as furniture." Gabriel said the words evenly, but something in his face tightened after they left his mouth. Julian noticed. "You do not." Gabriel's eyes shifted toward him. "That is irrelevant. Not if Rourke notices you noticing." Gabriel gathered the photographs and placed them back inside the folder. "He will not." Julian did not argue. He had known Gabriel for 14 years. He understood that some lies became more dangerous when spoken aloud. The next morning arrived with pale winter light spreading over the harbor. Grace entered Cross Harbor Tower at 7:10. She prepared Gabriel's schedule, corrected another error, and placed his preferred black coffee beside the folders waiting inside his office. At 8:40, Gabriel passed her desk with his attention fixed on his phone. "Good morning, Mr. Cross." He nodded and continued walking. The door closed behind him. Grace sat down. A few minutes later, the elevator opened again. Noah stepped onto the executive floor carrying 2 paper cups. He saw Grace behind her desk and smiled as if he had already found the only person he had come to see. "Tell me you haven't had coffee yet." Grace looked at the cup in his hand. For once, the morning did not feel quite so cold. Noah crossed the executive floor with 2 coffee cups in his hands and the relaxed confidence of a man who did not understand that every step was being observed. Grace looked up from her screen. "Tell me you have not had coffee yet." "I have had coffee." Noah glanced at the mug beside her keyboard. "That is not coffee. That is a cry for help." Grace tried to keep her expression serious. "It has caffeine. So does engine cleaner." He placed the fresh cup in front of her. 1 cream, 2 sugars. Grace stared at it. "You remembered." Noah leaned one hand against the edge of her desk. "I pay attention." The words touched something tender inside her. Noah said them lightly, but Grace felt their weight. He remembered how she drank her coffee. He noticed when she stayed late. He noticed when she smiled and when she did not. People often noticed what Grace did for them. Noah noticed Grace. She lifted the cup. "This is very kind. I was hoping for impressive. You brought coffee from the lobby." There was a line. "That changes everything. I risked my entire morning." Grace shook her head. "You are impossible. Only before 10. Noah glanced toward Gabriel's closed office. "How is the king of Baltimore today?" Grace lowered her voice. "You should not call him that." "Why not? Because walls have ears?" Noah looked at the dark glass surrounding them. "These walls look expensive enough to have lawyers." A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. It was not the polite sound she used in meetings. It was bright, warm, and unguarded. Noah smiled. "There it is." Grace looked down at the coffee. "What I was beginning to think this floor had taken it from you." "Taken what?" "Your laugh." Grace lifted her eyes. For a moment neither of them joked. Noah's expression held no demand, only concern. Grace did not know what to do with that kind of attention. Then Noah raised the second coffee cup. "To architectural failure." Grace laughed again. Inside the private office, Gabriel Cross stopped reading. Julian stood near the conference table with a black folder open in front of him. Gabriel lifted his head. The sound came through the closed door like warmth slipping beneath a locked window. He had heard Grace speak hundreds of times. Her voice lived inside the rhythm of his days. "Your 9 o'clock is waiting. Legal needs your signature. The car is downstairs." She was always calm, always precise, always careful not to take up more room than her work required. Gabriel had never heard her sound like this. Happy. He placed the report on his desk. Julian watched him rise. "What is it?" Gabriel moved toward the door. "I'm not sure. That usually means trouble." Gabriel opened the door. The sight in the corridor struck him with a force he had not expected. Grace stood behind her desk with one hand around a coffee cup. Her head was slightly tilted. Her brown hair had already begun to loosen near her temples. Her eyes were bright. Noah stood close enough to be familiar. Too close. The floor changed the instant Gabriel appeared. Conversation stopped. Chairs shifted. Several employees lowered their eyes. Grace felt the silence before she saw him. Her smile faded. Gabriel stood in the doorway looking directly at her. Not through her. Not toward the elevator or the conference room. At her. Something cold and possessive moved beneath his ribs. He looked at the coffee in her hand. Then at Noah. Julian. Julian stepped into the corridor. "Yes." "Who is he?" Noah straightened. Grace's pulse began to race. Julian's eyes moved between the three of them. "Noah Bennett, security supervisor." Gabriel's gaze remained on Noah. "Why is he on this floor?" Noah answered. "I brought Miss Nolan coffee." Gabriel looked at Grace. "Did you request it?" "No." The answer came too quickly. Noah glanced at her surprised. Grace felt heat rise into her face. "I mean, he was being thoughtful." Gabriel's expression did not soften. "That is not part of his assignment." Noah's shoulders tightened. It took 30 seconds, then returned downstairs before it becomes 31. The quiet around them became absolute. Noah looked toward Grace. "I will see you later." Gabriel's voice cut through the corridor. "No, you will not." Noah turned back. For one brief second, something sharp passed between the two men. Noah was younger, less powerful, and standing in a building that belonged to Gabriel in every way that mattered. Still, he did not immediately lower his eyes. Julian moved closer. "Elevator." Noah took a slow breath. He looked at Grace one final time. "You have my number." Gabriel's jaw tightened. Noah walked away. Grace watched the elevator doors close behind him. When she turned, Gabriel was still looking at her. Inside, Grace picked up her notebook from habit. His office door closed behind her with a soft click. Gabriel walked to the front of his desk but did not sit. Grace remained near the door. The harbor stretched beyond the windows, gray water beneath a pale sky. A freighter moved slowly through the channel, distant and silent. Grace held the notebook against her stomach. Did I do something wrong? Gabriel glanced at the coffee cup in her other hand. You were distracted. Noah brought me coffee. I saw that. He was being kind. Gabriel's eyes lifted to hers. You were laughing. Grace waited for the rest of the sentence. It did not come. Is that against company policy? No. Then I do not understand. Gabriel moved around the desk. He stopped several feet away. I have passed your desk every morning for a year. I know. You greet me. You organize my schedule. You correct mistakes before anyone else notices them. That is my job. I have never heard you laugh like that. Grace looked at him. There was something in his voice she had never heard before. Not anger. Something less controlled. Maybe no one here ever gave me a reason. The words left her before caution could stop them. Gabriel's expression changed. And he did. He brought me coffee. That is not what I asked. Grace's pulse climbed into her throat. Why does it matter? Gabriel took one slow step closer. Because the first time I truly look at you, you are smiling at another man as if he matters. Grace forgot the notebook in her hands. She forgot the office outside the door. For one suspended moment, there was only Gabriel standing before her, his calm face hiding something dangerous. Why would that bother you? His gaze moved over her face as if he were learning it. When he answered, his voice was lower. Because now I cannot stop seeing you. Grace drew in a sharp breath. Gabriel looked almost angry at the truth. He stepped back. You may go. The dismissal came so suddenly that Grace remained still. Then she nodded. Yes, Mr. Cross. She opened the door and returned to her desk. No one looked directly at her. That made the attention worse. She sat, opened a folder, and stared at a page without understanding a single word. 10 minutes later, Gabriel left for a meeting. He stopped beside her desk. Grace's heart jumped. Move the legal review to 11:30, he said. Yes, Mr. Cross. His eyes met hers. Only for a second. Then he walked away. The glance stayed with her for the rest of the day. By noon, Grace had replayed his confession so many times that the words seemed to exist inside every sound around her. Because now I cannot stop seeing you. At 2, she convinced herself that Gabriel had spoken from jealousy, not affection. At 4, she decided jealousy itself made no sense unless something had existed before it. At 6, she hated how alive she felt. She left the tower after dark. The wind coming from the harbor was sharp enough to water her eyes. Traffic hissed over wet streets. Restaurant windows glowed against the cold. Grace rode the bus home with Gabriel's voice still following her. Her apartment felt smaller than usual. She dropped her keys in the dish near the door and stood in the dark kitchen. He had seen her. That was all she had wanted for a year. Now she understood that being seen by Gabriel Cross came with a pressure she had not imagined. His attention did not feel gentle. It felt like standing in the path of something powerful that had finally changed direction. Grace slept badly. When morning came, she dressed with more care than usual and became angry with herself for doing it. She chose a cream blouse, a dark skirt, and the small gold earrings her mother had given her for graduation. She pinned her hair back, then removed the pins, then put them in again. "You are going to work," she told her reflection. Her reflection did not look convinced. Grace arrived at Cross Harbor Tower 10 minutes early. 2 women from finance entered the elevator behind her. They stopped talking when they saw her. One smiled too brightly. "Morning, Grace. Good morning." The other woman studied her phone for the entire ride. Grace felt the rumors before anyone spoke them aloud. When the elevator opened, she stepped onto the executive floor and stopped. Her desk was gone. The chair, monitors, phones, lamp, legal pads, and white potted plant had disappeared. Only a clean space remained against the glass wall. For a moment, Grace wondered whether she had entered the wrong floor. The office manager hurried toward her. "Miss Nolan?" She looked at him. "Where is my desk?" "Mr. Cross changed your workspace." "To where?" The manager pointed toward Gabriel's office. Through the clear glass, Grace saw a second workstation inside. It stood 6 feet from Gabriel's desk. Her monitor had already been connected. Her files were arranged in neat stacks. The brass lamp sat near the keyboard. Her plant waited in the corner. Gabriel had moved every part of her professional life into his private office overnight. "He wants to see you as soon as you arrive," the manager said. Grace looked at the closed door. "Of course he does." She crossed the corridor beneath the attention of the entire floor. When she knocked, Gabriel answered immediately. "Come in." He was already behind his desk reading a report as though nothing unusual had happened. Grace closed the door. "You moved my desk." Gabriel looked up. "Yes." "Without asking me." "Yes." "Why?" He placed the report down. "Because I want you here. That is not a professional reason. It is an honest one." Grace glanced through the glass walls. People outside were pretending not to watch. "They are staring. They will recover. They are going to talk. I know. You do not care." "No." Grace stared at him. Gabriel leaned back in his chair. "I would prefer they understand. Understand what? That access to you goes through me." The words hit a place in Grace that was still tender from the night before. She set her bag on the new desk. "I am your assistant. I am not your property." Silence entered the room. Gabriel's face did not change, but his eyes did. Grace saw the impact of the sentence. "No," he said. "You are not. Then stop making decisions as if I am." He studied her for a long moment. The city moved behind him, ships and traffic and winter light. Finally, Gabriel gestured toward the chair. "Sit." That sounded like another order. His mouth tightened. "Please sit." Grace sat. Gabriel placed his hands flat on the desk. "You were underused outside. That is not why you moved me." "No." "Then give me the real reason." "I already did. You wanted me here." "Yes. That explains what you want. It does not explain why I should accept it." Something close to respect moved through his gaze. Gabriel opened a folder. "You will take control of all executive scheduling. Legal will no longer bypass you. Every contract requiring my signature comes through your review. Department heads will report changes directly to you." Grace looked at the documents. "You are expanding my position." "Yes." "Because you heard me laugh with another man. Because I should have done it months ago." Grace lifted the first page. The title read, "Director of Executive Coordination." The salary beneath it was nearly twice what she currently earned. She looked back at him. "I want this in writing. It is in your hand. I want the reporting structure clarified. I want the title registered with Human Resources. I want the salary change effective before I move a single meeting." Gabriel's mouth almost curved. "You think I would refuse? I think men in your position are accustomed to gratitude. And you are not grateful. I am careful." His eyes rested on her. "That may be what I like most about you." Heat moved into her face. Grace looked down at the document. "Do not say things like that while I am negotiating." "Why?" "It gives you an unfair advantage." "I was not aware I needed one." Grace gave him a flat look. This time Gabriel did smile. It was slight, brief, almost hidden, but she saw it. "You smiled?" "No. You did. Prove it." Grace felt her own mouth curve before she could stop it. The first hour inside his office passed with careful professionalism. Grace answered calls, redirected department heads, and reviewed contract packets. Employees entered with questions and stopped when they saw her seated inside. Gabriel made no effort to explain. When an attorney tried to hand him a folder directly, Gabriel did not take it. "Grace." The attorney turned. Grace held out her hand. "Thank you." The man gave her the folder and left with confusion written across his face. Grace waited until the door closed. "You did that on purpose?" "Yes. You enjoy making people uncomfortable. Only when discomfort is educational. That is a very polished way to describe intimidation." Gabriel returned to his report. "It remains accurate." By 10:30, Grace became aware of how much she had never seen from outside the office. Gabriel worked with ruthless concentration. He read every page placed before him. He remembered numbers without checking notes. He listened more than he spoke. When people lied, he became quieter. That was when they became afraid. During a call with a warehouse director, Grace noticed a figure in the freight report that did not match the invoice she had processed the previous week. She wrote the correct number on a legal pad and slid it across Gabriel's desk. He glanced at it. His eyes sharpened. "The December storage estimate is wrong," he said into the phone. A pause followed. "No. Do not send me another summary. Send the original invoices." He ended the call and looked at Grace. "How did you know I processed the first invoice? That was 3 weeks ago. Yes? You remembered the amount?" "Yes." Gabriel leaned back. "You protected me from repeating false information." I corrected a number. "You protected me. That is my job." His gaze remained on her. "I am beginning to dislike that answer." Grace looked back at her screen. "Then stop asking questions about my job." At noon, lunch arrived. A catering attendant brought grilled fish salad bread and coffee to the small table near the windows. Grace stood. "I can eat in the break room." "No." She looked at Gabriel. "You cannot answer every disagreement with one word. Watch me." The pulse at the base of her throat moved. Grace hated that he noticed. His eyes lowered briefly before returning to her face. She sat across from him. Below them, Baltimore spread around the harbor beneath a white winter sky. Cars moved over the bridges. Cargo cranes turned slowly above the water. For several minutes, they ate in silence. Grace had imagined sitting across from Gabriel more times than she wanted to admit. In her imagination, she had always been graceful. In reality, she could barely taste the food. Gabriel set down his water glass. "You are quiet. I am eating. You were less quiet with Bennett." Grace looked at him. "Are you jealous?" The question landed without warning. Gabriel did not look away. "Yes." Grace's breath caught. She had expected denial, amusement, perhaps anger, not honesty. "You barely spoke to me for a year." "I know. You walked past me every morning." "I know. And now you are jealous because someone brought me coffee." His expression hardened. It was not the coffee. It was the laugh. "Yes." Grace placed her fork down. "Why did you ignore me?" Gabriel looked toward the harbor. For the first time that day, his answer did not come immediately. "I did not." Grace stared at him. "You never looked at me." "I looked when you could not see." The words entered the space between them and remained there. Grace's chest tightened. "That is worse." "I know." Why? Gabriel's jaw shifted. "Because people study what a man protects." Grace remembered Julian's words from the previous evening. "He worries badly." She sat very still. "You were trying to protect me. I was trying to keep you outside my world. You made me feel invisible." Gabriel's gaze returned to her. "Yes." The lack of defense hurt more than an argument would have. "You do not get to call that protection. No. You do not get to decide that loneliness is safer for me. No." Grace searched his face. "Why are you agreeing with me because you are right?" The answer removed the anger she had prepared. Gabriel leaned forward slightly. "I knew when you arrived. I knew when you left late. I knew when you skipped lunch. I knew the sound of your footsteps outside my door." Grace felt her pulse in her fingertips. "The tea." "What tea?" "The tea that appeared when I was sick." Gabriel took a drink of water. "Julian has many talents." "That was you." He did not answer. "The driver, last night. It was raining." "It barely rained. The streets were wet." Grace almost laughed. "You are a terrible liar. I am usually excellent. Not with me." "No." The admission softened something inside her. Grace looked down at her hands. "There is something you should know." Gabriel became still. "What?" She could have protected herself. She could have said the attraction was new, that his attention had confused her, that she needed time. Instead, Grace told the truth. "I have been trying not to love you for almost a year." The silence that followed seemed to reach every corner of the office. Gabriel placed his glass down with deliberate care. "Say that again." Grace's face burned. "You heard me. I want to hear it again." She lifted her eyes. "I have loved you since the charity event in the lobby." His expression shifted. "What happened in the lobby?" "The little girl with the broken bracelet." Recognition entered his face. "You saw that. I see almost everything." Gabriel stood. Grace's chair moved softly against the floor as she rose. He crossed the space between them with slow certainty. When he stopped, only inches remained between their bodies. "A year," he said. Grace nodded. "I knew it was pointless." "Nothing about you is pointless." His hand lifted. For the first time since she had known him, Gabriel hesitated. His fingers stopped near her face, waiting. Grace understood what he was asking. She could step back. She did not. His hand settled against her jaw. The touch was careful, almost reverent. "I am sorry," he said. "For what?" "For making you believe I did not see you." The tenderness in his voice broke the last of her resistance. Gabriel bent toward her. Grace met him halfway. The kiss carried a year of silence. It was deep without being careless, restrained only by the thin thread of judgment they both still possessed. Grace's hand closed around the front of his shirt. Gabriel's fingers moved to the back of her neck. The room disappeared. There was no company, no harbor, no glass wall full of watching employees. Only the heat of his mouth and the terrible relief of finally touching what she had denied herself for so long. Gabriel pulled back first. Their foreheads nearly touched. His breathing was no longer controlled. Grace looked at him. "This cannot happen while I report directly to you." Gabriel's eyes remained on her mouth. "Then we change the structure. You cannot rebuild the company because you kissed your assistant." "I can." That was not permission. He closed his eyes for one brief second. When he opened them, the hunger remained, but he stepped back. You are right. Grace's heart was still racing. You agreed too quickly. I am learning. A knock sounded at the door. Gabriel's expression changed instantly. The man who had kissed her disappeared behind the calm face of the CEO. Come in. Julian entered. He looked at Grace, then at Gabriel, then at the lunch table. His eyes revealed nothing. Bennett is outside. Gabriel's face cooled. Why, he says he needs to review a camera issue. Grace folded her arms. Let him in. Gabriel looked at her. She held his gaze. After a moment, Gabriel nodded to Julian. Noah entered seconds later. He stopped when he saw Grace standing near Gabriel's desk. His attention moved to her new workstation, then to Gabriel, then back to Grace. Can I speak with you? Gabriel answered. You are speaking. Noah ignored him. Grace, did you agree to this? Grace looked toward her desk. Not at first. Noah's jaw tightened. That is not the same as yes. Gabriel took one step forward. Grace moved between them. I can answer for myself. Both men went still. She looked at Noah. I am safe. That is not what I asked. No. I did not agree before he moved the desk. I challenged him. The position has changed and I accepted it under my own terms. Noah studied her face. And this. His eyes shifted briefly toward Gabriel. Grace understood the question. This is my decision too. Pain crossed Noah's expression, but he did not turn it into anger. He nodded slowly. All right. Gabriel remained silent. Noah looked at Grace. Being wanted and being respected should feel like the same thing. Grace felt Gabriel react behind her. She did not turn. I know. Noah gave her a small smile. Take care of yourself. You too. He left. The door closed. Grace turned toward Gabriel. You will not punish him for that. Gabriel's face revealed very little. He questioned my judgment in my office. He questioned whether I had a choice. You did. He did not know that. Gabriel looked toward the closed door. Grace waited. Finally, he said, He keeps his position. That sounded painful. It was. A second knock came before she could answer. Julian entered again. This time he carried a plain white envelope. His expression had lost every trace of amusement. He closed the door behind him and placed the envelope on Gabriel's desk. What is it? Gabriel asked. Someone left it with the front desk. Gabriel opened the envelope. He removed a photograph. For 1 second, his entire body became still. Grace stepped closer. What is it? He turned the photograph face down. That movement frightened her more than anything else could have. Gabriel. Julian looked at him. Gabriel did not respond. Grace reached for the photograph. He caught her wrist. Do not. She looked at his hand, then at his face. You promised to stop deciding what I am allowed to know. His grip loosened. Grace turned the photograph over. It showed her leaving her apartment the previous night. Her coat was buttoned to her throat. Her head was lowered against the wind. The image had been taken from across the street, clear enough to identify her, close enough to know where she lived. Grace felt the room tilt. On the back, 6 words had been written in black ink. A careful man should hide what he loves. Grace lifted her eyes. Gabriel was no longer looking at the photograph. He was looking at Grace with a fear so cold and controlled that it changed the air inside the room. Julian moved first. He crossed to the glass wall and pressed a control near the door. The clear panels darkened until the office disappeared from the rest of the executive floor. Outside, employees continued moving through their morning. Inside, the world narrowed to one photograph and the 6 words written across its back. A careful man should hide what he loves. Grace read the sentence again. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, almost elegant. That made it worse. There was no rage in the message, no careless insult. Whoever had written it wanted Gabriel to know that they had been patient enough to watch her and calm enough to enjoy it. Grace placed the photograph on the desk. How long Julian glanced at Gabriel. Grace looked between them. How long has someone been following me? We do not know yet, Julian said. That means this is not the first sign. Neither man answered. Grace felt anger push through the fear. What else happened? Gabriel's voice was low. A man came into the lobby yesterday afternoon. What man? He used a false name. He asked whether you still lived alone. The words landed with a quiet brutality. Grace stared at him. He asked that? Yes. How did he know my name? We are determining that. What else did he ask? Gabriel's jaw tightened. Your schedule, which entrance you use, whether you drive to work. Grace wrapped her arms around herself. The office was warm, but she suddenly felt cold. She imagined the route she took every day, the bus stop near her apartment, the grocery store on the corner, the narrow entrance to her building, the row of dark windows across the street, all the ordinary places where she had believed she was alone. Who was he? Julian answered. We ran the lobby cameras. The image did not match any known identity. He paid cash for parking and left in a vehicle with stolen plates. Grace looked at the photograph again. This is because of you. Gabriel did not defend himself. Yes. The answer was so immediate that it took the air from her anger. Grace stepped away from the desk. Tell me who is doing this. Gabriel looked at Julian. Leave us. Julian hesitated. Gabriel, now. Julian's attention moved to Grace. There was concern in his face, but also respect. He gave a small nod and left the office. The door closed. Grace turned toward Gabriel. Do not protect me with half the truth. His expression sharpened. You do not know what the whole truth costs. Then tell me the price. For several seconds only the distant hum of ventilation filled the room. Gabriel moved to the windows. The harbor below looked calm. Cargo ships drifted through the gray water. Cranes lifted containers from one world to another. He placed both hands in his pockets. Victor Rourke controls most of the illegal freight moving through southern Baltimore. Grace knew the name. Everyone who worked near the harbor had heard it eventually, usually in lowered voices. Rourke Shipping. That is the legal company. And the other one Gabriel turned. There are weapons stolen, medical supplies, narcotics, and people who disappear before they reach the docks. Grace swallowed. You stopped him. I blocked 3 of his routes and bought 2 of the companies he used to move cargo, so he wants them back. He wants control of the southern corridor. Grace remembered the delayed steel shipment, the disputed warehouse invoices, the meetings Gabriel had canceled without explanation. This has been happening for months. Yes. And you never told me. You handled corporate operations. You did not need the rest. Grace looked at him in disbelief. I handle your schedule, your contracts, your calls. I sit outside your office while men come in carrying black folders and leave looking afraid. Do not tell me I did not need to know. Gabriel's gaze hardened. Knowing creates danger. Not knowing created this. She touched the edge of the photograph. They found me anyway. The truth of it struck him. Grace saw it. Gabriel moved closer to the desk. Rourke cannot defeat me directly. Why? Because direct pressure is expensive. He would lose men, money, and every alliance he still has. So he looks for something softer. Yes. Grace held his gaze. And now he thinks, that is me. Gabriel's face became unreadable. He knows it is. The words cut deeper than she expected. Grace turned away. She looked through the darkened glass, but she could not see the people outside, only her own reflection. A quiet woman in a cream blouse standing inside the office of the most dangerous man in Baltimore. For a year, she had wanted him to see her. Now strangers knew where she slept. When did they notice Gabriel did not answer? Grace faced him. When did they know I mattered? His eyes met hers. Yesterday. The hallway. Yes. When you sent Noah away. Yes. When you looked at me in front of everyone. His mouth tightened. Yes. Grace let out a slow breath. One moment. One mistake. The way he said it hurt. Grace studied him. Was it a mistake to care, or a mistake to let them see his expression changed? Do not confuse regret with doubt. The answer came with enough force to still her. Gabriel stepped closer. I regret exposing you. I do not regret what I feel. Grace's heartbeat became uneven. He lifted one hand as if to touch her, then stopped. This time, he waited. Grace did not move away. His fingers settled lightly against her jaw. I spent a year believing distance was enough, he said. I should have known better. Grace looked up at him. You cannot solve this by making me disappear. I can move you somewhere secure. That is not what I said. You are not going home tonight. The order returned so easily that her anger rose again. No. Gabriel's hand dropped. No. You do not decide where I sleep. When men are photographing your front door, I do. Grace stepped back. You promised to listen. I promise to respect your choices. Then respect this one. No. The word landed like iron. Grace stared at him. Gabriel's voice remained calm, but something dangerous moved beneath it. Your apartment has 2 street entrances, 1 broken camera, a fire escape anyone can reach, and a lock installed before you moved in. Grace went still. You investigated my building. Yes. When? He did not answer quickly enough. A new understanding entered her. You knew where I lived before yesterday. I knew where my employee went after leaving the office. No. You knew where I went. Gabriel's eyes held hers. I made sure you arrived safely. You let me believe you never noticed me. That was the point. Grace shook her head. No. That was convenient for you. His expression tightened. You think I enjoyed it? I think you controlled the situation because control is easier than honesty. For the first time, anger flashed openly across his face. You believe I watched you walk home alone because it was easy. I believe you decided what I was allowed to know because it was easy for you. The silence between them sharpened. Gabriel looked toward the photograph. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Men like Rourke do not ask permission before hurting someone. Neither do you. The sentence landed harder than she intended. Gabriel's face became still. Grace almost took it back. She did not. I am not comparing you to him, she said. I am telling you that fear does not give you the right to control every choice I make. His eyes remained on her. If you return to that apartment, I cannot keep you safe. Then explain the danger and let me choose. I just explained it. No, you issued an order. Grace stepped closer to the desk and placed both hands on the polished surface. If I leave with you, there are conditions. Gabriel looked at her as if no one had ever given him conditions inside his own office. Grace continued. You tell me every threat involving me. His jaw shifted. You do not take my phone. I had not planned to. You do not decide who I can speak to. His expression cooled. Bennett. Noah included. Gabriel said nothing. Grace waited. Finally, he nodded once. "You do not make changes to my job without asking me." The position was appropriate. "That is not an answer." Another pause. "Agreed. You do not send people into my apartment without me. That is not safe." "Then I go with Julian." Gabriel's mouth hardened. "Grace, you said I could choose. I said I would respect your choices. I did not say I would approve of them. I can live with that." His eyes narrowed. "You are enjoying this." "I am terrified." The honesty changed the room. Grace straightened. "My hands are cold. I keep looking at that photograph and wondering how many times I passed the person holding the camera. I want to go home, lock my door, and pretend this is not real." Gabriel's face softened by a degree. Grace continued, "But I will not let fear turn me into furniture again. Not even protected furniture." For a long moment, Gabriel said nothing. Then he reached for his phone. "Julian." The door opened almost immediately. Julian entered. "Bring the car to the private entrance. 2 vehicles in front, 1 behind." Grace lifted a finger. "And I go to my apartment with you." Gabriel looked at her. That was not one of the conditions. "It is now." Julian watched them both. Gabriel's voice became dangerously calm. "No." Grace folded her arms. "You said I could retrieve my things. You said Julian would go with you. I changed my mind. You are not going back there. Then I am not leaving this building." Julian looked toward the ceiling as if asking for patience from a higher power. Gabriel studied Grace. She held his gaze. Finally, he spoke through clenched control. 10 minutes inside. Julian enters first. You touch nothing until he clears it." Grace nodded. "Agreed." Gabriel looked at Julian. "You heard her." "I did. Do not sound amused. I would never." They left Cross Harbor Tower through a private service elevator. Grace sat between Gabriel and the window in the rear of a black vehicle. Julian rode in front. 2 additional cars surrounded them as they moved through downtown traffic. Baltimore passed outside in familiar pieces. Brick row houses, corner stores, church spires, painted murals, winter trees reaching over narrow streets. Grace had traveled the same route hundreds of times. Now every parked car looked occupied. Every face on a sidewalk seemed turned toward her. Gabriel noticed. "Do not search every window. I cannot stop. You will make yourself sick." "I did not know you cared about that." His eyes shifted to her. "I care about everything that happens to you." The words should have comforted her. Instead, they made the walls of the car feel closer. Grace looked away. Her apartment building stood on a quiet street in Hampton between a laundromat and a bakery that opened before dawn. Julian entered first with 2 security officers. Gabriel remained beside Grace on the sidewalk. His hand rested lightly at her back. It was not forceful. It was impossible to ignore. Julian appeared in the doorway. Clear. They entered. Grace climbed the stairs with Gabriel behind her. The hallway smelled of old cooking and floor cleaner. A television played somewhere behind a closed door. Pipes knocked inside the walls. Her apartment looked exactly as she had left it. A mug beside the sink, a coat over the chair, mail on the table, a book face down near the sofa. Ordinary. Vulnerable. Gabriel stood in the center of the living room and looked around. His gaze moved over the window locks, the narrow fire escape, the thin front door. Grace watched him calculate every weakness. "This is my home," she said. "I know. You look like you hate it. I hate that someone watched it." Grace went into the bedroom and pulled a small suitcase from beneath the bed. She packed clothes, toiletries, a framed photograph of her mother, and the book from the living room. Gabriel remained near the doorway. "You can have anything brought later. These are enough." His eyes moved toward the chipped paint above the radiator. You lived here alone? Yes. For how long? 3 years. He looked at her. You never asked for anything. From whom, anyone. Grace closed the suitcase. Asking does not guarantee receiving. Gabriel's face changed. He stepped into the room. No, it does not. Grace picked up the suitcase. He took it from her. I can carry it. I know. Then why do you keep doing that? Doing what acting as if my ability means you cannot help? Grace stared at him. The words reached deeper than she wanted. Before she could answer, Julian appeared in the hall. We found something. He held up a small black device. Grace frowned. What is that camera transmitter? Her stomach turned. Where? Across the street. Attached behind a utility box. It had a clear view of this window. Grace looked toward the glass. For 3 years she had stood there drinking coffee, reading folding laundry, talking to her mother on the phone. Gabriel's entire body changed. The warmth left him. Trace it. Julian nodded. Already started. Gabriel carried Grace's suitcase downstairs. She took one final look at the apartment before closing the door. For the first time, home did not feel like safety. It felt like a place someone had already entered without crossing the threshold. Gabriel's residence stood in Fells Point inside a converted waterfront warehouse. The exterior was brick and old iron restored without losing its history. No bright sign marked the entrance. No doorman stood beneath a canopy. Security cameras disappeared into the architecture. Inside the building opened into dark wood stone and warm light. Grace followed Gabriel through a private elevator to the upper floor. The doors opened directly into his home. Broad windows faced the harbor. Black water moved beneath the evening sky. The living room held low furniture, bookshelves, and art. Grace suspected belonged in museums. The space was beautiful. It was also controlled. Nothing seemed accidental. A woman in her 50s entered from a hallway. Her silver-streaked hair was arranged in a smooth twist. She wore a simple black dress and the expression of someone who had spent years managing complicated men without raising her voice. Mr. Cross. Margaret. This is Grace Nolan. Margaret looked at Grace with calm intelligence. Welcome, Miss Nolan. Grace is fine. Then Margaret is fine. Gabriel set down the suitcase. She will be staying here. Margaret looked at him. For how long? Gabriel's answer came immediately. Until this is finished. Grace looked at him. Margaret noticed. Perhaps Grace should decide that. A faint silence followed. Gabriel's jaw tightened. Grace almost smiled. I will stay until it is safe to return home. Margaret inclined her head. I will prepare the room beside Mr. Cross. Gabriel looked toward her. The East Guest Suite. Margaret raised one eyebrow. The room beside yours is more secure. Grace saw the brief conflict in Gabriel's face. He wanted her close. He did not want to admit it in front of Margaret. The room beside mine, he said. Margaret nodded. Of course. As she left, Grace turned to Gabriel. She is not afraid of you. No. Why? She knew my mother. That does not answer the question. It answers enough of it. Grace's room was larger than her apartment. Cream walls, a wide bed, a fireplace, a bathroom lined with pale stone. Her suitcase sat near the closet, though she had not seen anyone carry it upstairs. Several new outfits had been arranged on the bed. Grace touched the sleeve of a soft gray sweater. You bought clothes for me. Gabriel stood near the door. Margaret ordered necessities. You guessed my size. His eyes moved over her with quiet precision. I do not guess often. Heat climbed into Grace's face. That was almost charming. It was not intended to be. Then you remain safe. The corner of his mouth shifted. Grace noticed. You did it again. What smiled? No. She looked at him. Gabriel stepped back into the hallway. Dinner at 8. Was that an invitation? He paused. Yes. Better. At 8, Grace found Gabriel in the kitchen with Julian. Maps, invoices, and photographs covered the marble counter. A red line marked the southern harbor corridor. 3 warehouse locations had been circled in black. Gabriel looked up. You should not be here. Grace stopped. This is where dinner is, not during this conversation. She walked closer. One of my conditions was information. This is operational. It involves me. It involves men who may try to kill you. That sounds relevant. Julian lowered his eyes to hide a reaction. Gabriel stared at Grace. She stared back. Finally, he moved one folder toward her. Sit. Grace did. The documents showed a list of companies with payments moving between them. One name caught her attention. Harbor Shield Consulting. She touched the page. I know this company. Gabriel looked at her. How they submitted emergency security invoices last month. Julian moved closer. To which division? 3 divisions. Warehouse maintenance, private transport, and executive facilities. Gabriel's expression sharpened. Who approved them? Grace searched her memory. The amounts were below automatic review limits. Different managers signed each one. That is deliberate, Julian said. Grace nodded. Someone split the payments. Gabriel pulled another file toward him. Julian opened a secure tablet and searched the company name. The screen filled with registration records. Harbor Shield Consulting had been created 9 months earlier. Its listed address belonged to an empty office building outside the city. Julian looked up. The owner is connected to Rourke. Grace felt the fear inside her change shape. Until that moment, she had been a target. Now she had found something. Someone inside Cross Harbor approved the invoices, she said. Gabriel's attention moved to her. Can you identify the account? The approval code should be in the executive system. You do not have access from here. Grace opened her laptop. I have remote authorization. Gabriel's eyes narrowed. Who gave you that? You did this morning. For 1 second, Julian looked almost pleased. Grace entered the secure system. The approval records appeared after several searches. The invoices had been routed through an executive credential. Martin Keene, Chief Operating Officer of Cross Harbor Industries. Gabriel became very still. Julian read the name. Keene has access to employee files. Grace looked at Gabriel. Including mine. Gabriel picked up his phone. Bring him in. Julian lifted a hand. Not yet. Gabriel's gaze turned cold. If Keene gave them her address, he is already dead. Grace looked at him. No. Both men turned toward her. Grace closed the laptop. If you move now, Rourke knows we found the connection. Gabriel's voice was quiet. He watched you undress through your bedroom window. Grace felt the violation like ice against her skin. She forced herself not to look away. And if you kill Keene tonight, we lose the chance to learn who else is involved. Julian nodded slowly. She is right. Gabriel's stare remained on Grace. You are asking me to leave a traitor inside my company. I am asking you to use him. Silence settled over the kitchen. Grace could see Gabriel fighting every instinct in his body. Finally, he placed the phone on the counter. Julian watched Keene. Already happening. No contact, no warning. Julian nodded. A new sound broke the quiet. Grace's phone vibrated. A message appeared from Noah. Something is wrong with the tower camera logs. Call me. Do not use the company network. Gabriel read the message over her shoulder. His expression cooled immediately. What does Bennett know? Grace looked at him. I will ask him. No, she turned. We agreed. He works in security. Keen accessed security records. That does not make Noah involved. It does not make him innocent. Grace picked up the phone. Gabriel's hand closed over her wrist. Not painfully, firmly. Grace looked down at it. He released her. Speaker, he said. That is not your decision. Grace, speaker, she agreed. Because I choose it. She called Noah. He answered after one ring. Grace, I am here. Are you safe? She looked at Gabriel. Yes. Noah exhaled. I found deleted footage from the executive elevators. Someone removed 6 minutes from yesterday afternoon. Julian leaned closer. Did you recover it? Grace asked. Part of it. A man entered the service level with an executive access badge. Can you identify the badge I sent the image to your phone? A photograph arrived. The badge number belonged to Martin Keene. Noah continued. There is something else. The system shows an override request from outside the building. Julian's face changed. Which system the residential security network connected to Mr. Cross's private account? Gabriel reached for the phone. How long ago Noah recognized his voice? About 3 minutes. Julian was already moving. He pulled out his weapon and crossed toward the control panel near the hallway. The lights went out. Darkness swallowed the apartment. A second later, red emergency lamps flickered to life along the floor. The harbor vanished beyond the windows. Margaret appeared at the kitchen entrance. What happened? Julian pressed the security control. Nothing responded. The system is down. Gabriel moved Grace behind him. His voice became cold and precise. Margaret, secure the upper hall. A distant metallic sound came from the service corridor. Not loud. A lock releasing. Then the soft click of a suppressed weapon being prepared in the dark. Gabriel reached beneath his jacket. Julian turned toward the hallway. Grace stood between them listening as footsteps entered the home. Someone inside Cross Harbor had not merely opened her files, they had opened Gabriel's door. The footsteps in the service corridor were slow and controlled, not the movements of men searching an unfamiliar home. They knew where they were going. Gabriel drew a pistol from beneath his jacket and placed himself between Grace and the hallway. Julian, take Margaret upstairs. Julian checked the dark security panel. The stairwell may be compromised. Then use the wine room exit. Margaret looked at Gabriel. That road opens near the alley. 2 guards should be outside. Julian glanced at the dead control screen. If they are still standing. A soft sound came from the corridor. Metal brushing stone. Gabriel turned toward Grace. Go with them. She stared at him. No. His face hardened. This is not a discussion. You need Julian. I need you away from the door. Grace heard another step. Closer now. Margaret reached for her hand. Grace. Gabriel lowered his voice. Please. The word stopped her. He had ordered rooms full of armed men without hesitation. He had looked at enemies as if their deaths were administrative details. Now fear lived openly in his eyes. Not fear of the men in the hallway. Fear that Grace would still be standing there when they arrived. She nodded. All right. Julian opened a narrow door beside the pantry and motioned for the women to enter. The passage beyond was dark and smelled of stone wine and cold air. Grace looked back once. Gabriel stood alone in the red emergency light gun lowered beside his leg, listening to the footsteps move toward him. The door closed between them. Julian guided Grace and Margaret down a narrow staircase. Stay close. Grace kept one hand against the wall. The steps curved beneath the residence toward the lower storage level. Somewhere above them, glass shattered. Margaret flinched. Grace did not. She could not afford to. Julian stopped at the bottom of the stairs and held up one hand. A faint light came from the wine storage room ahead. Rows of dark bottles filled the walls. Beyond them stood a steel service door leading to the rear alley. Julian moved forward. Grace watched him reach for the handle. Then he stopped. A thin black wire had been attached to the inside lock. Julian crouched. "Do not touch the door." Margaret whispered. "What is it?" "Alarm bypass. Possibly an explosive trigger." Grace's stomach tightened. They knew about this exit. Julian looked toward the ceiling. They knew the entire security plan. A burst of gunfire sounded above them. 3 shots. Then silence. Grace turned toward the stairs. "Gabriel." Julian caught her arm. "You are not going back. He is alone. He is Gabriel Cross. That does not make him bulletproof." Julian's eyes hardened. "My job is to keep you alive. My life is not more valuable than his. To him it is." The words struck with painful clarity. Another sound came from the passage behind them. A door opening. Julian pushed Grace and Margaret behind a stone column. "Stay down." A shadow moved at the top of the stairs. Julian raised his weapon. The first shot broke the darkness. The figure fell backward. A second man appeared behind him and fired into the storage room. Stone burst beside Julian's shoulder. Bottles shattered. Red wine spilled down the wall like blood. Julian fired twice. The second intruder disappeared from view. "Move," Julian said. He guided Grace and Margaret through the rows of shelves toward a secondary passage. Grace remembered the building plans she had seen on Gabriel's kitchen counter. The maintenance tunnel. Julian looked at her. "What? There is another access point behind the third storage wall. How do you know?" "It was on the plans." Julian moved toward the wall Grace indicated. A wooden rack stood against the stone. Together, they pulled it aside. Behind it was a narrow metal door. Julian tested the handle. Unlocked. He opened it to a concrete tunnel filled with pipes. "Margaret, go." Margaret stepped through, then turned back. "What about Grace? She is behind you." Grace started toward the tunnel. A hand seized the back of her sweater. She was pulled hard against a man's chest. Cold metal pressed beneath her jaw. Julian spun. The attacker held Grace in front of him, using her body as a shield. Blood ran from a cut near his temple. His eyes were bright with pain and rage. "Put it down." Julian kept his weapon aimed at the man's head. Grace could feel the attacker's breathing against her hair. "Let her go." The man tightened his arm around her throat. "I said put it down." Margaret stood frozen inside the tunnel. Julian's gaze moved briefly to Grace. She understood the calculation in his face. He could take the shot. He could also miss by less than an inch and kill her. Grace pressed her fingers against the attacker's wrist, pretending to struggle without purpose. Julian slowly lowered his gun. The attacker smiled. "That is better." Grace felt the edge of the weapon dig into her skin. "Where is Cross?" Julian said nothing. The man pushed the barrel harder beneath Grace's jaw. "She can answer." Grace forced her voice to remain steady. "You came through his home. You should know." The attacker gave a quiet laugh. "She has a mouth. She also has no information," Julian said. The man pulled Grace backward. "Mr. Rourke only needs her breathing." Grace stopped struggling. The name confirmed everything. Victor Rourke had ordered the attack. The attacker began moving toward the stairs. Julian followed with his hands visible. "What does Rourke want?" "You know what he wants. The southern corridor." The attacker smiled. "Cross signs it over and maybe the girl goes home." Grace listened carefully. Maybe. Not a promise. Rourke never intended to release her. He wanted Gabriel to surrender first. Then he would kill her anyway, proving that Gabriel had traded power for nothing. Grace needed the man to believe she was frightened enough to become careless. She let her knees weaken. The attacker tightened his hold. "Stand up. I cannot breathe." "You are breathing. Not enough." Grace forced a rough sound from her throat. The man adjusted his arm. Only slightly. It was enough. Grace drove the heel of her shoe down onto his foot, twisted her body, and slammed the back of her head into his face. Pain flashed across her skull. The attacker cursed. His grip loosened. Grace dropped to the floor. Julian fired. The bullet struck the man's shoulder and spun him into the stone wall. His weapon fell. Julian reached Grace first. "Are you hit?" "No." "Can you stand?" Grace pushed herself upright. Margaret rushed from the tunnel and held her face between both hands. "You are bleeding." Grace touched the back of her head. Her fingers came away red. "It is not mine." A loud crash shook the ceiling. Dust drifted from the pipes. Julian looked upward. "We need to move." Grace stared at the stairs. "Gabriel is still up there." Julian picked up the attacker's weapon. "So are at least 2 more men. You said there were guards outside. They may be cut off from the building. Then call them. The signal is blocked." Grace looked toward the utility pipes along the tunnel wall. A red valve sat beneath a label marked Fire Suppression. She remembered seeing the same system on the residence plans. "What happens if that opens?" Julian followed her gaze. "The lower alarms activate. Local system or digital mechanical. Then they cannot block it." Julian understood. It will flood the service corridor with steam and trigger the building alarm downstairs. It may also blind us. Grace reached for the valve. Julian caught her wrist. "Once this opens, everyone knows where we are. They already know." He looked at her for 1 second, then released her. Grace turned the valve. Nothing happened. She pushed harder. The metal groaned. Then the pipes began to shake. A deep alarm rang through the walls. Steam exploded into the service corridor above them. The attacker on the floor coughed and tried to reach for his gun. Julian kicked it away. Red emergency lights began flashing inside the storage room. The building was no longer silent. Grace heard movement above, men shouting, a door slamming. Then gunfire. Not the controlled shots from before. A violent exchange. Julian looked toward the staircase. "That is Gabriel." Grace was already moving. Julian caught up with her. "I told you to stay behind me. You also said he was Gabriel Cross." They climbed through the steam. The upper corridor had become a red and white blur. Water sprayed from the ceiling. Broken glass covered the floor. A body lay near the pantry. Grace recognized one of Gabriel's guards. His eyes were open. She looked away too late. Julian moved ahead, weapon raised. They entered the kitchen. The marble island was cracked where a bullet had struck it. Papers floated in water across the floor. The maps Grace had studied were soaked and torn. A man emerged from the living room. Julian fired first. The intruder fell beside the windows. Grace searched the room. "Gabriel." No answer. Then she heard his voice from the upper level. "Grace." One word, sharp with fear. "I am here." She ran toward the stairs. Julian cursed behind her. Grace climbed through smoke and flashing red light. At the top, she saw Gabriel. He stood at the far end of the hallway with blood on one side of his face. His shirt sleeve was torn. A pistol hung from his right hand. Relief struck his expression when he saw her. Then his eyes moved past her. Down. Grace dropped. A shot passed over her head. Gabriel fired. The man behind her fell against the stair rail. Julian reached the landing and pulled Grace upright. Gabriel crossed the hall in 3 long steps. He placed both hands on her face. "Are you hurt?" "No." "There is blood in your hair. It is not mine." He checked her neck, her arms, her shoulders. His hands were controlled, but his breathing was not. Grace touched the cut near his temple. "You are bleeding. I am fine." A door opened behind him. The final attacker stepped out of Gabriel's bedroom. He seized Grace before Gabriel could turn. An arm locked across her chest. a pistol pressed beneath her jaw. Gabriel stopped. The hallway became completely still. The attacker was older than the others, gray at his temples, calm eyes, no panic in his breathing. He had waited while the younger men drew Gabriel out. Grace felt his hand settle firmly around her throat. "Drop the weapon, Cross." Gabriel's gun remained raised. The man pressed the barrel harder against Grace. "You know how quickly this ends." Gabriel looked at Grace. Not at the gun. At her. "Let her go." The attacker smiled. Victor was right. Gabriel's face revealed nothing. "About what?" "You can be trained." Julian stood near the stairway, but the angle was wrong. The attacker kept Grace between himself and both men. "Drop it." Gabriel slowly lowered his weapon. Grace watched his fingers open. The gun struck the floor. The sound felt impossibly loud. The attacker laughed. "All that power." Gabriel did not move. "All those men afraid to say your name, and one quiet woman makes you obedient." Grace felt Gabriel's gaze hold hers. There was no surrender in it, only calculation. "What does Rourke want?" Gabriel asked. "You know. The corridor, every warehouse, every contract, every route from Curtis Bay to the state line." And Grace walks out. The attacker smiled again. "You are not in a position to negotiate." Gabriel's voice lowered. "I am always in a position to negotiate." The man pulled Grace closer. "Sign the transfer documents by midnight, and if I refuse, she becomes a message." Grace felt the words against her skin. Gabriel looked at the man. "If you harm her, Rourke loses every person who has ever carried his name. You will not reach him before I pull this trigger." "No." Gabriel's eyes returned to Grace. "But she will." The attacker's grip changed. Only a fraction. Confusion. Grace understood. Gabriel was not promising that she would kill Rourke. He was telling her to move. She let her body go slack. The attacker tightened his arm instinctively. Grace drove her elbow backward into his ribs. At the same instant, she turned her face away from the weapon. Gabriel lunged. The attacker fired. The sound struck the hallway like thunder. Gabriel's body hit Grace and carried her to the floor. Julian fired twice. The attacker crashed against the wall. His weapon fell from his hand. For 1 second, Grace heard nothing. Then Gabriel's weight shifted above her. He pushed himself up on one arm. "Grace." She stared at him. His face had gone pale. A dark stain spread across his shirt beneath his ribs. "No." Gabriel looked down as if the wound belonged to someone else. Grace pressed both hands over it. Blood moved between her fingers. "No. Gabriel, stay with me." His eyes searched her face. "Are you hurt?" "You were shot. Answer me. I am fine." Only then did some of the tension leave his body. Julian knelt beside them. The bullet passed through. Grace looked at him. "Is that good?" "It is better than staying inside." Gabriel tried to sit up. Julian forced him back down. "Do not move. I need to know the building is clear. I will clear it. Rourke's men may be outside. They are not getting near her." Gabriel looked at Grace. "No one gets near her." His voice was weaker now. Grace pressed harder against the wound. "You do not get to give orders while bleeding on the floor." His mouth moved faintly. "I have given orders in worse places." She felt tears burn behind her eyes. "Do not make jokes." That was not a joke. Then it was a terrible statement. Julian spoke into a radio that had begun working again. "Bring Dr. Shaw through the lower entrance. Now." Gabriel's fingers closed around Grace's wrist. She looked down. His hand was cold. "I spent a year pretending you meant nothing. Save your strength. I thought distance would protect you." "Gabriel, I was wrong." Grace leaned closer. "You can apologize when you are not losing blood. His eyes remained fixed on hers. "I love you." The words entered her like a second shot. Everything around them disappeared. The alarm, the water falling from the ceiling, Julian's voice, the body against the wall. Grace saw only Gabriel lying beneath her hands, his blood warm against her skin. "You do not get to say that and die." "I am not planning to." "You are very pale. I have always been pale." A broken laugh escaped her through the tears. Gabriel's thumb moved once against her wrist. Grace bent closer until her forehead touched his. "I love you too." His eyes closed. Grace's heart stopped. "Gabriel, I am listening. Keep doing that." Julian placed a folded cloth over the wound and pressed down. Gabriel's face tightened, but he made no sound. Footsteps rushed up the stairs. 2 guards entered with a woman carrying a black medical case. Dr. Evelyn Shaw was small, direct, and entirely unimpressed by the blood surrounding her. "Move him to the medical room." Grace looked at Julian. "He has a medical room?" "Of course he has a medical room." 4 men lifted Gabriel onto a stretcher. His hand remained around Grace's until the hallway forced them apart. Dr. Shaw looked at Grace. "You are covered in blood. It is his. I can see that. I am staying. You will stay out of my way." The medical room was hidden behind Gabriel's office. Bright lights came on above a narrow surgical table. Stainless steel cabinets lined one wall. Machines began displaying Gabriel's pulse and blood pressure. Grace stood near the door while Dr. Shaw cut through his shirt. The bullet had entered below the ribs and passed through his side. "Liver appears clear," Dr. Shaw said. "Possible muscle damage. Significant blood loss." Grace watched Gabriel's face. His eyes were open but unfocused. Dr. Shaw prepared an injection. Gabriel looked toward Grace. "Do not leave. I am here. Promise. I promise." The medication entered his arm. His eyes closed. Grace remained in the room while Dr. Shaw cleaned and repaired the wound. She watched blood disappear beneath gauze. She watched Julian enter twice with updates. The building was secure. 2 attackers were dead. 1 was unconscious. The man Grace had struck in the storage room was alive and in custody. Martin Keene had disappeared from his apartment less than an hour before the attack. By the time Dr. Shaw finished, dawn had begun turning the harbor windows gray. Gabriel slept in a private bedroom beside the medical room. Grace sat in a chair near him. Her clothes had dried stiff with his blood. Margaret brought clean clothes and placed them on the bed. "You should change." Grace looked at Gabriel. "What if he wakes?" "I will stay." Grace shook her head. Margaret sat beside her. "He has survived worse. That does not help." "No." Grace rubbed her hands together. "I thought he was dead." Margaret looked toward Gabriel. "He has spent most of his life believing death is easier to face than love." Grace lowered her eyes. "He told me he loved me while he was bleeding. That sounds like him." Grace almost smiled. Margaret touched her shoulder. "Change your clothes. He will need to see that you are all right when he wakes." Grace entered the bathroom. She washed Gabriel's blood from her hands, but the water seemed to stay pink no matter how long it ran. When she returned, the sky had brightened. Gabriel's eyes were open. Grace crossed the room immediately. "You are alive." His voice was rough. "You sound surprised. You were shot. I noticed." She sat beside him. "You stepped in front of me." "Yes, you could have died." His gaze held hers. "So could you. That does not make what you did reasonable." "I was not trying to be reasonable." Grace looked at the white bandage beneath his shirt. Anger rose with the relief. No more deciding alone. Gabriel's expression became guarded. "Grace, no more half-truths. No more moving me from place to place without giving me information. No more treating me like something fragile enough to lock away. You were nearly taken from my home, and I helped stop them. You were held at gunpoint. So were you." His jaw tightened. Grace leaned closer. "I know your instincts will not change because I ask once. I know fear makes you reach for control, but I will not love you from inside a cage." Silence settled over the room. Gabriel looked toward the harbor. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. "I do not know how to do this. Do what care about someone without calculating every way I could lose her." Grace's anger softened. "You can start by telling her the truth." His eyes returned to hers. "All right. And asking instead of ordering. That may take longer. Then practice." Gabriel reached for her hand. "Will you stay?" The question was simple. Grace closed her fingers around his. "Yes." Julian entered a few minutes later carrying a black folder and a sealed plastic bag. He looked exhausted. Blood marked the cuff of his shirt. "The surviving men are talking." Gabriel tried to sit higher. "Doctor." Shaw appeared in the doorway. "Lie down." Gabriel ignored her. She walked into the room and pressed a hand against his shoulder. "You can lead your criminal empire from the pillow." Julian looked away. Grace hid a smile. Gabriel remained still. Julian opened the folder. Rourke ordered the abduction. Martin Keene supplied the employee records and the residence plans. "Where is Keene?" "We found his car near the train station. He was not inside." Gabriel's expression cooled. "Find him." "We will." Julian placed the plastic bag on the bed. Inside was a folded piece of paper recovered from the final attacker's coat. Grace opened it before Gabriel could stop her. Only one sentence was written across the page. "Choose the corridor or the girl. Midnight tomorrow." Gabriel looked at Julian. "Call everyone." Grace tightened her hold on the paper. "What are you going to do, Rourke? With how many bodies?" "As many as required." "That is what he expects." Gabriel's gaze turned toward her. "He attacked my home. He wants you angry. He put a gun against your throat. And now you want to answer exactly the way he planned." The room became still. Julian watched Grace carefully. She placed the note beside the black folder. "Rourke thinks I am only leverage. He thinks you will trade the corridor or start a war." Gabriel's voice remained cold. "He will not survive either option. His men may. His money will. His political protection will. Someone else will take his place." Grace looked at Julian. "Do we still have the harbor shield records?" "Yes." "And the access logs Noah recovered, yes." Grace turned back to Gabriel. "Then we do not begin with his soldiers." Gabriel studied her. "We begin with the companies protecting him." Julian's attention sharpened. Grace continued. "Harbor Shield connected his money to cross-harbor invoices. Keene's access records connect him to the attack. The surviving men connect him to the abduction order." Gabriel understood. "We freeze his legal accounts. We send the evidence to his port partners before he can threaten them into silence." Julian added, "The Port Authority will suspend every license tied to the shell companies." Grace nodded. "And the men sitting beside him will see that staying loyal costs more than abandoning him." Gabriel looked at her for a long moment. "You planned all of that while I was unconscious. I needed something to do." A faint expression touched his face. Not amusement, pride. "You are frightening. You moved my desk into your office. This is partly your fault." Julian closed the folder. "I will prepare the evidence." Gabriel looked at him. "Call the council." Julian paused. "All of them. All of them." After he left, Gabriel turned to Grace. "You do not need to be there." Grace stood. "I know. It will be dangerous. So is my apartment. This is not the same." "No. This time I know what room I am entering." Gabriel's eyes darkened. "I can send you out of Baltimore until this is finished. I spent my whole life leaving rooms before anyone could decide I mattered. This is not about proving courage." "No." Grace placed the note in his hand. "It is about choosing where I stand." Gabriel looked down at the words Victor Rourke had sent. The corridor, or the girl, a choice written by a man who believed Grace was an object to be traded. Gabriel folded the paper once. "If you enter that room, every person in it will know what you are to me." Grace met his gaze. "They already know." His expression tightened. "They will study you. Let them. They will search for fear. They will find it." Gabriel looked surprised. Grace moved closer to the bed. "Courage is not entering the room without fear. It is entering while fear is still there." She touched his hand. "I am not asking you to hide me." "No, I am not asking you to own me." His fingers closed around hers. "No. I am asking you to stand beside me." Gabriel was silent for several seconds. Then he asked, "Will, you stand beside me?" Grace held his gaze. "Yes." The answer remained between them quiet and absolute. Gabriel looked at Grace as if he were seeing the shape of a future he had never allowed himself to imagine. Not because the future was safe, because she had chosen to enter it with her eyes open. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips against her knuckles. The gesture was gentle, almost formal, but Grace felt the weight beneath it. A promise made by a man who had spent most of his life treating promises like contracts written in blood. "You stay beside me," he said. Grace raised one eyebrow. That sounded like an order. Gabriel closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them again, the faintest trace of exhaustion softened his face. "Will you stay beside me?" "Yes." "Close enough for Julian to reach you?" "Gabriel, close enough for me to reach you?" Grace studied him. His skin was still pale. The bandage beneath his shirt was clean, but every careful breath reminded her that a bullet had passed through his body less than a day earlier. "You should be in bed. I am in bed. You should remain there. The council meets at 9. Then they can meet here." "They will not." "Why?" "Because men like that need a table large enough to pretend they are equal." Grace almost smiled. Dr. Shaw entered with a glass of water and 2 tablets. They also need a leader who does not tear open his stitches trying to prove he is immortal. Gabriel looked at her. "I have never claimed immortality." "No. You simply behave as if death requires an appointment." She handed him the medication. He took it without argument. Grace noticed. Dr. Shaw noticed too. Her gaze moved between them. "This is new." Gabriel swallowed the tablets. "What is compliance?" Grace folded her arms. "He is practicing." Gabriel gave her a look that would have frightened most of the city. Grace held it without blinking. Dr. Shaw smiled. "I may keep you around." The council meeting was arranged inside a private dining room above an old hotel near the waterfront. The hotel had survived fires, bankruptcies, storms, and 3 generations of men who used its upper floors for conversations that could not happen in public. Its brick walls faced the harbor. Narrow windows looked out over black water and warehouse lights. The lobby smelled of polished wood, old carpet, and rain carried in on expensive coats. Gabriel arrived through the rear entrance. He wore a dark suit tailored carefully around the bandage beneath his ribs. No one looking at him would have known he had been shot, unless they noticed the slight stiffness in his movements or the way Julian stayed half a step closer than usual. Grace walked beside him. She wore a black dress beneath a long wool coat. Margaret had chosen it from the clothes delivered to the residence, but Grace had chosen everything else. Her hair was pulled back simply. No diamonds, no dramatic makeup, no attempt to look like the kind of woman the men upstairs expected Gabriel Cross to love. She carried a leather folder beneath one arm. Inside were the records that could dismantle Victor Rourke's legal protection. At the base of the stairs, Gabriel stopped. Julian and 2 security officers waited several feet behind them. Grace looked up. "What is it?" Gabriel's gaze moved over her face. "You can still leave." "I know. I can have Julian take you somewhere secure." "I know. They will insult you. Probably. They will try to frighten you. They already sent men into your home." His jaw tightened. Grace stepped closer. "Do you want me to leave? No. Then stop offering me the door." Gabriel looked toward the staircase. For one moment, the man who controlled half the harbor seemed uncertain how to proceed. Grace touched his hand. "I am here because I decided to be." His fingers closed around hers. Then they climbed the stairs together. The private dining room occupied the entire upper floor. A long walnut table stood beneath low brass lights. Heavy curtains covered the windows. 12 men and 3 women sat around the room, each accompanied by advisors, guards, or attorneys whose official titles explained very little. Some controlled unions. Some owned freight companies. Some financed construction projects that never stayed within budget. Others had spent decades surviving between legal business and organized crime without allowing either world to fully claim them. Conversation ended when Gabriel entered. Every face turned toward him, then toward Grace. The silence that followed was not surprise alone. It was calculation. Grace felt them measuring her clothes, her posture, the distance between her body and Gabriel's, whether she looked frightened, whether he did. A broad man with silver hair sat near the center of the table. Anthony Valenti controlled several transport unions and had worked with Gabriel's father. His eyes moved to Gabriel's side. "I heard you were injured." Gabriel removed his coat. "You heard incorrectly." Valenti's gaze dropped briefly toward Gabriel's ribs. "Of course." At the far end of the table sat 2 men representing Victor Rourke. The first was Ellis Crane, an attorney whose expensive suits could not hide the fact that he had spent 20 years protecting violent men from consequences. The second was Franklin Moss, a warehouse owner with narrow eyes and a gold ring on each hand. Moss looked at Grace and smiled. "So, this is her." Gabriel pulled out the chair beside his own. Grace sat. He remained standing. Moss leaned back. "I expected someone more impressive." Gabriel's expression did not change. Grace opened the leather folder. "Most men who underestimate me do." Several people around the table shifted. Moss's smile faded. Ellis Crane looked toward Gabriel. "You brought your assistant to a council meeting." Grace removed the first set of documents. "Director of Executive Operations." Crane glanced at her. "Congratulations. Thank you." His tone had been mocking. Hers was not. Gabriel placed one hand on the back of Grace's chair. "She is here because this meeting concerns her." Valenti looked around the room. "This meeting concerns the corridor. The corridor became personal when Rourke sent armed men into my home." A woman near the window spoke. Her name was Evelyn Price, owner of a private freight network operating between Baltimore and Philadelphia. Rourke denies giving that order. Julian stepped forward and placed a recording device on the table. The voice of the surviving attacker filled the room. He named Victor Rourke. He described the payment. He confirmed Martin Keene's role. He repeated the order to take Grace alive and force Gabriel to surrender the southern corridor. No one interrupted. When the recording ended, Crane folded his hands. A frightened man will say anything under pressure. Grace slid a photograph across the table. It showed the camera attached near her apartment. She added the access records from Cross Harbor Tower, the security override, and the Harbor Shield invoices. Then, perhaps financial records will speak more clearly. Crane looked down. Grace opened a second folder. Harbor Shield Consulting received payments through 3 Cross Harbor divisions. Those payments were divided below review limits and approved through Martin Keene's executive credential. Moss laughed. You believe a few false invoices prove Victor ordered an attack. Grace placed another document beside the first. I believe these prove Harbor Shield funded the vehicle's weapons and residential access equipment used during the attack. Moss stopped laughing. Grace continued. The company is registered through a law office owned by your brother. Every eye in the room moved toward Moss. His face darkened. That is a lie. Grace turned to page 17. His signature appears on the formation documents. Moss reached for the file. Grace kept one hand on it. You can read it from where you are. Gabriel watched her without speaking. He had entered the room prepared to threaten, negotiate, and destroy. Grace was doing something far more dangerous. She was making every person at the table understand that Rourke had involved them without permission. One man near Valenti opened his own copy of the evidence. My company is listed here. Grace nodded. Your trucks were used to move equipment from a Harbor Shield warehouse. I did not authorize that. I believe you. The man looked toward Crane. The first crack appeared in Rourke's protection. Grace turned another page. 3 port licenses connected to Rourke's companies were renewed using false inspection reports. 2 freight insurers accepted altered cargo records. A political action fund received money from one of the same shell companies. Evelyn Price studied the documents. Who else has these? Grace met her eyes. The Port Authority. A stir moved through the room. The insurance carriers. Crane's face tightened. The State Licensing Board. Moss pushed back from the table. You sent this outside the council. Grace looked at him. Victor Rourke sent men into a private residence and put a gun beneath my jaw. Her voice did not rise. He stopped treating this as an internal dispute. Crane turned toward Gabriel. You allowed her to do this? Gabriel's expression became almost cold enough to quiet the entire room. I did not allow her to do anything. Crane looked surprised. Gabriel continued. She found the records. She built the evidence. She made the decision. Grace felt the words settle inside her. Not ownership. Recognition. Valenti leaned back. Rourke's accounts will be frozen by morning. Some already are, Julian said. Evelyn Price closed the folder. And his port license is suspended pending investigation. Moss looked toward the other council members. You are all willing to turn on Victor because Cross brought a woman into the room. Valenti's expression remained calm. No. He tapped the evidence. We are turning on him because he used our companies without telling us. Another man spoke. He brought federal attention to the harbor. A third added, he attacked a council member's home without approval. The room shifted. Rourke's representatives were no longer seated among allies. They were seated among men considering how quickly they could separate themselves from him. Crane looked toward Grace. This is what he wanted. She waited. You were supposed to make Cross weak. Grace closed the folder. He mistook love for weakness. Moss stood. And what exactly are you? The insult beneath the question was clear. Gabriel moved before Grace could answer. He placed both hands on the table and leaned forward. Pain flashed briefly through his face, but his voice remained steady. Grace Nolan is under my protection. Moss smiled. So she belongs to you? No. The single word stopped him. Gabriel straightened. She does not belong to me. Grace looked up at him. His gaze remained on the room. She stands beside me because she chose to. Any threat against her will be treated as a threat against the Cross organization. Any man who follows her, watches her home, touches her family, or sells information about her will answer to me." Moss's smile disappeared. Gabriel continued, "But do not mistake protection for ownership. She has her own name, her own authority, and her own decisions." Grace felt the silence change around them. The men at the table had expected possession. They understood possession. It was how they spoke about territory, companies, and people. Gabriel was telling them something harder to control. Grace was not protected because she was his property. She was protected because she had chosen to stand with him. Crane rose slowly. "You are starting a war over an assistant." Gabriel looked at Grace. "No." Then he faced the room. "I am ending one over the woman I love." No one laughed. Julian's phone vibrated. He checked the screen and moved toward Gabriel. "Rourke is calling." Gabriel held out his hand. Julian placed the phone in it. The room remained silent as Gabriel answered. "Victor." Rourke's voice came through the speaker. "You think freezing a few accounts changes anything?" Gabriel set the phone on the table. "It changes your ability to pay the men standing around you. You sent records to the authorities. Grace did." A pause followed. Then Rourke laughed. The sound was dry and without humor. "The girl has more nerve than I expected." Grace leaned toward the phone. "That was your first mistake." The room went still again. Rourke's voice changed. "So she speaks for you now?" "No," Grace said. "I speak for myself. You think paperwork makes you dangerous?" "No." Grace opened the final file. "I think the names of your political contacts make you vulnerable." Rourke said nothing. Grace continued. "I think the account in Delaware makes you vulnerable. I think the warehouse you registered through your cousin makes you vulnerable. I think every person at this table now understands that protecting you costs more than abandoning you." A longer silence followed. When Rourke spoke again, the amusement was gone. "You should have stayed behind your desk." Grace's fingers tightened around the paper. For a moment she saw her old life. The small desk outside Gabriel's office. The polite voice. The habit of making herself smaller, so louder people could feel powerful. Then she looked around the council table. "I spent years behind desks," she said. "That is where I learned to see everything men like you ignore." Rourke's breath came through the phone. "You will not always have Cross standing beside you." Gabriel's expression turned deadly. Grace answered first. "I did not bring him into this room to speak for me." She reached across the table and ended the call. No one moved. Then Evelyn Price leaned back in her chair. "That may be the first time I have heard anyone hang up on Victor Rourke." Valenti looked at Gabriel. "You chose well." Gabriel's gaze moved to Grace. She chose. The council dissolved Rourke's protections before midnight. His port allies withdrew their support. His insurers froze shipments. 2 union leaders refused to move his cargo. The attorney who managed his shell companies disappeared before dawn with copies of the financial records. Martin Keene was found at a motel outside Annapolis. He had cash, a false passport, and a train schedule in his room. Julian brought him back to Baltimore alive. Grace did not ask what happened afterward. She asked only whether he had given her information to Rourke. Julian told her the truth. Keene had sold access codes, employee records, and residential security plans in exchange for money and a future position inside Rourke's organization. He had believed Gabriel's empire was weakening. He had mistaken restraint for vulnerability. By morning, Victor Rourke no longer controlled the southern corridor, By afternoon, state investigators had warrants for 3 of his companies. Before sunset, 2 of his closest allies had agreed to testify. Rourke himself vanished. Some said he fled north. Others said he never made it out of Baltimore. Gabriel offered Grace no answer. She did not ask again. Several days later, Cross Harbor Tower returned to its normal rhythm. Employees moved through the marble lobby with coffee and phones. Elevators opened without sound. Winter light crossed the glass walls. But Grace's place inside the building had changed. Her workstation remained inside Gabriel's office, though a clear partition now separated it from his desk. The new space had its own door meeting area and direct access to the executive conference room. Her title had changed again. Director of Executive Operations. She reported to the board's operations committee rather than directly to Gabriel. The arrangement had been Grace's condition. Gabriel had accepted it without argument. Almost without argument. Grace stepped off the elevator carrying a folder and found Noah waiting near her office. He wore a dark coat instead of his security uniform. A cardboard box rested beside his feet. She stopped. "You are leaving." Noah glanced down at the box. "I thought it looked obvious." "Where are you going, Washington? That sounds serious." "A security firm offered me a position." Grace looked toward the lobby cameras. Did Gabriel arrange it? No. She studied his face. Noah smiled. "I asked Julian the same thing." "What did he say?" "He said, Mr. Cross does not usually reward men who bring coffee to women he loves." Grace laughed. Noah's expression softened. "There it is." The words carried her back to the morning. Everything changed. 1 cream, 2 sugars. "I pay attention." Grace touched the edge of the folder in her hands. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For the way everything happened. You do not control how other men behave." "No. But I should have told you the truth sooner." Noah nodded. "That would have helped." Grace looked at the box. "Are you leaving because of me? I am leaving because the new job pays more and has fewer criminal conspiracies. That sounds reasonable. It also has windows that do not judge me." Grace smiled. Noah's expression became more serious. "Are you happy?" The question deserved more than an automatic answer. Grace looked through the glass wall. Gabriel stood inside his office speaking with Julian. He wore a dark suit. His movements were still careful, but color had returned to his face. As if sensing her attention, he looked toward her. Their eyes met. Grace turned back to Noah. "I am learning how to be." He nodded slowly. "Good." She touched his arm. "You saw me before anyone else did." Noah looked toward Gabriel. "I do not think I was the first." Grace followed his gaze. Gabriel remained where he was. He did not cross the room. He did not call security. He waited. Noah lifted the box. "Take care of yourself, Grace. You too." He stepped into the elevator. The doors began to close. Noah raised one hand. Grace did the same. Then he was gone. She entered Gabriel's office. Julian collected the folders from Gabriel's desk. "I will give you 2 privacy." Gabriel looked at him. "I did not ask." "You did not need to." Julian left. Grace placed her folder on the new workstation. Gabriel watched her. "You spoke to Bennett?" "Yes." "What did he want?" "To say goodbye." Gabriel's face remained neutral. Grace removed her coat. "You let him leave without threatening him." "I considered it. That is progress. He is moving to another city, which is not the same as exile." Gabriel looked away. Grace narrowed her eyes. "You did not arrange the job." "No." "Gabriel, I did not arrange it." She waited. He exhaled. "I may have ensured the firm understood his qualifications." Grace stared at him. "He earned the position." "I know. Then why interfere? I did not interfere. You made a call. I confirmed that he was competent. You threatened the company, did you not? No. Grace continued looking at him. Gabriel adjusted one cuff. I may have suggested that failing to hire him would demonstrate poor judgment. A laugh escaped her. Gabriel's expression softened. There. Grace stopped. What? The laugh. He looked at her with the same intensity he had shown the first morning, but the jealousy was no longer sharp enough to wound. It still changes the room. Grace walked toward his desk. You nearly removed a man from the building because of that laugh. I remember. You moved my desk overnight. It was an efficient decision. It was an insane decision. Both can be true. She stopped in front of him. His gaze moved toward the glass partition around her new office. Do you like it? Grace noticed the question. Not a decision presented as fact, not an order hidden inside concern. A question. Yes. Is there anything you want changed? The lighting near the conference table. I will have it adjusted. And the man behind the desk. Gabriel raised one eyebrow. What would you change about him? He could say, "Good morning" occasionally. Gabriel rose carefully. Good morning, Grace. It is almost noon. I am improving gradually. She smiled. His hand settled at her waist. He waited before pulling her closer. Grace stepped into him willingly. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside the windows, Baltimore moved beneath a clear winter sky. Ships turned through the harbor. Trucks crossed the bridges. Cranes lifted steel containers into the light. Grace looked toward the empty place outside the office where her old desk had once stood. A week ago, you walked past me as if I were part of the furniture. Gabriel followed her gaze. I know. I thought you had never really seen me. I know. Then another man made me laugh. His mouth tightened slightly. I remember that too. You looked ready to start a war over a cup of coffee. He stood too close. He stood beside my desk. Exactly. Grace shook her head. What changed that morning? Gabriel's expression grew serious. I stopped lying to myself. That is not all. No. He touched her face. The hand that once reached for her as if tenderness were unfamiliar now rested against her skin without fear. I spent a year believing distance would keep you safe. It did not. No. It only made me believe I did not matter. Gabriel's eyes darkened with regret. That was the worst mistake I have ever made. Grace studied him. You have made some serious mistakes. I am aware. And now. He looked directly into her eyes. No hesitation, no guarded silence, no careful distance. Now you are the first person I see. Grace rose onto her toes and kissed him. The kiss was softer than their first one. No panic, no jealousy, no fear that the moment would disappear if they did not hold it tightly enough. Gabriel's arms closed around her, but he did not trap her. Grace stood in the center of the office because she had chosen to be there. She was no longer the quiet woman outside a closed door. She was no longer the assistant who repaired the lives of powerful people while asking nothing for herself. The city knew her name. Gabriel knew her strength. More importantly, Grace knew both. When they separated, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. Dinner tonight. Grace smiled. Is that an invitation? Yes. Then yes. His thumb brushed her cheek. Your place or mine? Grace looked through the glass toward the harbor. Mine. Gabriel went still. The apartment is not secure. My new apartment. He stared at her. You found one yesterday, without telling me I was going to tell you. When at dinner? Where is it? Near Mount Vernon. What floor? Third. Security Gabriel. He closed his mouth. Grace waited. He tried again. Would you like Julian to inspect it? She smiled slowly. Yes. Relief crossed his face. But only after I give permission. Agreed. And you do not buy the building. I had not considered it. You are considering it now. No. Grace raised one eyebrow. Gabriel looked toward the window. I will try not to. She laughed again. The sound moved through the office warm and alive. This time Gabriel did not step into the corridor to remove the man who caused it. He remained beside the woman who had finally learned that being seen was not the same as being owned. And Grace, who had spent most of her life disappearing before anyone could leave her behind, stayed exactly where she was. Not because Gabriel Cross demanded it, because for the first time she had chosen a life large enough to hold her.